Welcome everyone. I'm just going to give it a few moments as people are coming in. Hello, hello. It's so nice to see so many people coming today for this webinar. I'm really excited. So yeah, I think we can begin. My name is Greg Stewart. I'm the coordinator of adult public programs and a museum educator here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Before we begin, I just want to say that it is with gratitude and humility that the Philadelphia Museum of Art recognizes Philadelphia as part of the Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral homelands of Lenape peoples. A long history of broken treaties, forced migrations, and fraudulent agreements, such as the walking purchase of 1737, displaced many Lenape from this land. The museum and our staff strive to understand our place within the legacy of colonization and to act as allies to Lenape people and their vibrant communities, including the federally recognized nations today of the Delaware Tribe, Delaware Nation, and the Stockbridge Munsee community. And we are working with our Lenape advisors to really put more of an action plan in place so that we can move beyond the words of this land acknowledgement. So I'm really excited to be joining you this afternoon on the occasion of our exhibition, Authenticity, Truth and Perception in Chinese Art. From this exhibition, we really want to discuss copying in Chinese art, raising questions about what we value in cultural artifacts. And to do that, we have some amazing speakers this afternoon. The first, Ai Weiwei, perhaps might not need much of an introduction to many of you. Weiwei, if you want to just say hello to everybody. Hello. Welcome. So Ai Weiwei is a world-renowned multimedia artist who also works in film, writing, and social media. He was born in Beijing and now lives and works in multiple locations, including Berlin, Cambridge, and Lisbon. Currently, his work is also featured in the exhibition Ai Weiwei, The Liberty of Doubt at Kettle's Yard, University of Cambridge, which deals with similar themes of authenticity in Chinese art and is one of the many reasons that we've invited him to speak today. And my colleague Lindsay is going to be sharing links to full bios in the chat, so look for those there. We are also joined by James J. Lally, who is the founder of J.J. Lally & Co., which through 2020 produced special exhibitions with scholarly catalogs of ancient Chinese ceramics, bronzes, sculptures, and jades. Chinese works from J.J. Lally & Co. are now in the collections of many museums, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And then we also have, oh, and James, if you want to just say hello to everybody. So hello. Put a face to your name. Thank you. And we also have Hiromi Kinoshita, who is the Hannah L. and J. Wells Henderson Curator of Chinese Art, who curated this exhibition and will be moderating our discussion today. Hello, Hiromi.
Hello.
So before I turn it over to our speakers, I just want to go over some housekeeping. The structure of this program this afternoon will be some contextual introductions from Hiromi, followed by presentations from Weiwei and James. Hiromi will then moderate a conversation with our speakers, followed by Q&A from you. And my colleague, Lindsay, if you want to say hello to people.
Hi, everyone.
We'll read those questions out loud. So you are in Zoom webinar, if you haven't noticed, so your camera and microphones are turned off, but you can ask questions in the Q&A box as they come up. Questions you really like can also be upvoted so that they rise to the top. This program is being closed captioned, and it's available by clicking on the CC button in the Zoom toolbar. It's also being recorded, and we will send the recording to everyone who has registered. And finally, I just want to say that the exhibition Authentic Truth and Perception in Chinese Art and the accompanying programs presented in conjunction with it are made possible by the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Global. And I wanted to thank the foundation for their generous support of this lecture. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Hiromi.
Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us for this very special program. I'm pleased to be able to welcome Ai Weiwei and James Lally, two authorities in their respective fields, to talk about copying and other questions related to it, including authenticity, intention, and value. With their collective experience in the Chinese art world, I hope that their viewpoints will add to the curators or museum's perspective that are presented in the exhibition, Authentic Truth and Perception. So one of the goals of the exhibition is to show that seeing is not always believing, that other considerations should be taken into account when judging a work of art. Also to see if we can extend this idea to real life situations, to encourage and be more aware of not just seeing the black and white, but also the gray in between. So the theme of authenticity came about while researching the Chinese collection for the reinstallation of our permanent galleries in 2019. Certain works needed to be reassessed, whether it was to be redated or assessing whether the work was an original or a copy. So normally copies would be devalued or thought of as less. But copying is not necessarily such a bad thing. After all, we all learn through copying and imitation. I thought it would be valuable to highlight different types of copying in the Chinese cultural sphere, showing how intention, context, and cultural perspective all color what we think about what is original and what is a copy. In the exhibition, copies are placed next to the original so that visitors can look carefully, observe visual differences, and draw their own conclusions. The groupings and the themes in the installation show this process and provide different perspectives. China has a long tradition of copying in the arts. For instance, in Chinese painting and calligraphy, students would copy and learn from not only their teachers, but also ancient masters. Chinese emperors also commissioned copies of art to be made from previous illustrious dynasties so as to have links with the past and also to show their erudite learning, which legitimized their mandate to rule. Distinguishing between what is original and what is a copy can be challenging, though. Using scientific means is sometimes possible to help answer such questions, but oftentimes we have to rely upon careful looking using our own two eyes and considering the context and the intention of the maker. And James Lally will be elaborating more on this. So Ai Weiwei has always been interested in copies, and his work usually touches upon original and copy, real and fake, and questions of value. So we'll hear from him next about some works featured in his newest exhibition that just opened in Cambridge in the UK, entitled Ai Weiwei, Liberty of Doubt, and we'll hear about his perspective on copying. Please, Ai Weiwei.
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm not a good one in describing my works, but I would try. This is a set of work I did in maybe a few years ago, and the work is related to Yuan Dynasty or early Ming Dynasty, blue and white porcelain plates. And I started working with Jin De Zhen, which is the main source in produce the highest quality of blue and white porcelains. And I have a kiln there and a group of people that all come from my same studio, but rather all the top expert working in Zhejiang, which is a town for 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years, have been focusing in produce high quality porcelains. The quality sometimes can getting so high, only the imperial court can afford to have that kind of quality, and that reaches the highest possibility human ever produced in terms of porcelain. And of course, people see this in different museums. And so porcelain has been fascinating to me because it's something you can really push it to an extremely high aesthetic level. And China has a rich history behind that. So, but I never really want to make one until I think maybe I can use that existing technique and the skills to extend it or to stretch it to the modern condition, to the world we are in. So this is one of the pieces I tried, but it's almost like a later piece because we already know porcelain after years of produce different sense. I already know it very well, I should say. So I have to create the language which, you see the plates with very different language and details, but the main theme is about refugee condition, human flow. So let's talk about the war and the people being pushed out from their homeland and the journey. And it's basically about our history, our modern reality, but also about history. Because since human ever exists, there's always human flow. There's always have to have the journey to go to somewhere for various reasons. So you can easily see that it's a temptation. And the drawings or the language of the details really come from a clear study of what we have in the past. And at the same time, with very skillful craftsmen, they can achieve the highest copies of the past, from the past. So so should we change to another one? Maybe my conversation will be too long. So the same kind of motive, but packed up as a pillar, and it's between these classic ones, but nobody ever would pair up two porcelain vases, one up on top of another. That's just, nobody would do that. And this looks like a kind of funny Brancucci's work. Let's go to another one. Okay, let's change the subjects. And this is a typical Ming Dynasty 四出头 chair made of modern same kind of wood they use in the Ming Dynasty. And the chair is by classic furniture dealer. They often can copy exactly same same style, same proportion, everything, measurement, except I put one element in between two arms. So the chair is perfectly made, but you cannot sit in. And it's a political work when this Chinese dissident could not go to receive his Nobel Prize. His name is Liu Xiaobo, so they had an empty chair there. So this work is it's all like many of my works. I always have work both have commentary about our history and past. At the same times reflects a same race or same nation or same kind of understanding about craftsmanship, but very violently in relate to or in interpretation of our time. So it's always combination in these two cases. Okay, next one. Please tell me when I should stop, because this can be too long or too short. I have no idea. But this is, we can see on the top is it's a marble piece first. On top was civilian cameras. We can see probably the most classical, but old generation civilian camera classics. But now you have a much smaller cameras. But bottom part is come from because I want to raise it up, but how can I come up something to raise it up? I will not just put on a table or on a stool. So I had a collection of lamps, marble lamps from Northern Qi or Northern Wei. There from this tomb objects. So the bottom part of this semi camera, the stand it's a piece from the Northern Qi. So it seems works perfectly well, but of course it's one piece. And I didn't have I didn't even have a chance to explain those things to anybody, except one recently have a show in Kettle's yard, and in the auction house, I bought a piece of the map, exactly the same. So I put two works showing together, my work in which has respect and relating to the Chinese old objects under the new auction piece. Next one, please. Okay, this is something really, if I look at it, it's really hurting me. It doesn't really look that nice, but we all can see that's a sign on this vase, and probably from around the Han Dynasty, because the air of that vase is a little bit special. Rarely to see, this two ears are built like that. But I have useless for this, so I just one day I was so bored. I painted this on that, and her friends likes it, so that's it. It's not much, nothing sophisticated about it. Next. Okay, this is a piece I did with a friend who is also an artist already. He's already passed away, since it just goes so fast. And it's originally it's called goo come down, a ghost goo come down from a mountain. And it's quite a well-known theme on this, I think early Ming pieces, probably. So I managed to have those, how many, I don't even remember, many of them, but each of them are painted differently. And but on the other side, let's say the next image from photo taken from the another angle, you see the images of ghost goo come down the mountain. But of course, the proportion of the image, each of them are different. Okay, this is my studio, and in Beijing I built it, but I really miss it. You know, I don't often see the images. Okay, let's go next. Okay, maybe next. Okay, so was easy job, but ironically it becomes some kind of iconic image about me, which is really come from a joke. Next one. Okay, this is a beautiful piece. It's about a work being auctioned in, I don't know which auction house years ago. And that single piece of blue and white reaches very high price. So I asked my friends to make a copy, and you know, about same size, little different in terms of form, and but only obvious different. Only someone understand Chinese art can tell is the dragon have 6 fingers. The dragon in China, only imperial can have 5 fingers. So this is 1 more finger more. And on the top, you can see 2 words there. Is write down in Chinese is fake. Oh yeah, that 2 words. Fake, that means fake, or the bad words fuck. So, but that's the time when China sometimes put their writings on that area. Very often it's imperial mark there about the time. Okay, next. Another version about same porcelain, when they have this this warm color or red color, which is more rare to have that color because the temperature control can just easily burn out the color. So if you see a classic one, very often not as pretty as this one. Next. Okay, that's group porcelains from Qing dynasty, basically, different period. I made an early show to show this group of copies, wonderful copies, in Korean museum, and displayed like a classic showcase. So people walk in, they really don't know how to pass what they have seen, or to really make some kind of judgment about it, because it looks perfectly beautiful as the old one, but same time it's a modern copy of different very typical forms. Next. Thank you.
I think that's the last slide we have.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Okay. My duty is over.
For now, yes. Thank you, Weiwei. I think we can go next to James Lally for his presentation.
Thank you, Greg. We'll keep this slide up. We'll come to this in a minute, but I wanted to say that this exhibition in Philadelphia is quite a good introduction to the challenge of authenticity. Is it authentic? This is a fundamental question behind our perception and appreciation of any work of art. But the concept of authenticity may be interpreted differently in different cultures. In the Western world, since the Renaissance in Europe, an authentic original work of art is regarded as the unique product of the artist's genius, and subsequent copies are regarded as inauthentic and inferior. But in China, the concept of authenticity is more complex and subtle. Throughout the history of painting in China, copying masterworks of the past has been an essential part of the painter's practice, both as a method of learning and as a valid and valued means of artistic expression throughout the artist's career. In the Chinese view, the artist painting copies may be seen as behaving like an accomplished musician playing a well-known classical composition. All the notes are always the same, but each performance is a different interpretation of the same score. But this open-minded and flexible attitude towards copying of art in the past does not apply equally to the perception and appreciation of ancient artifacts and antiques. In ancient antique Chinese works of art, such as porcelains and jades, collecting antiquities and works of art has a very long history in China. Already in the Song Dynasty, 1,000 years ago, Chinese emperors formed large collections of ancient bronzes, jades, and works of art. The scholar elite of the imperial bureaucracy followed the emperor's lead and began collecting in the same way, and the market quickly expanded. In the succeeding dynasties, Chinese emperors continued to collect ancient Chinese art, and they also commissioned the production of more jades, ceramics, and works of art. Some of those works of art were made to contemporary taste. Some were made as close copies or revivals of ancient forms and designs. Many of the ceramics and works of art made for display and use by the emperor and his court closely followed archaic forms and designs, but they were not copies made to deceive. Rather, they were recognized as genuine at the time when they were made, and they are properly understood as authentic today. Over the years, the market for ancient Chinese art and artifacts expanded, and explicit copies began to appear on the market. These were not artisanal revivals or reinterpretations, honestly described. Rather, they were imitations misrepresented as antiquities. They were meant to deceive, and they were commercial reproductions. And whether made 100 years ago or last week, they are regarded as forgeries in China and around the world. This special exhibition of Chinese ceramics now on display in Philadelphia, Authentic Truth and Perception, provides several excellent examples of genuine antique porcelains which illustrate the prevalence of revivals and reinterpretation of earlier antique porcelains throughout Chinese history. This slide here, showing pieces that are in the exhibition. The far left is the 15th century original of a very unusual hexagonal form of blue and white porcelain vase made under the reign of the Emperor Xuande in the first quarter of the 15th century. This shape had never been seen before. This was an original product of that early period in the Ming. But in the 17th century, the vase in the center revived that Ming original, that early Ming original, and can be considered a piece almost in homage of the past production of the 15th century. And on the third example on the right, dates to the Yongzheng period, early 18th century, as a bold reinterpretation of the original early Ming form. In the next slide, you can see, if you would please, the second slide, two versions of the Chenghua chicken cup. We can see both are very, very similar, but there's more than 100 years between them. The chicken cup on the left, which is an original 15th century Chenghua period chicken cup. And I can say that with authority because the mark shown below it, the 6 Chinese characters in a square, are engraved, are not engraved, but painted on the bottom of the chicken cup itself. Can be read Da Ming Chenghua Nian Shi, made under the reign of the Ming Emperor Chenghua. The cup on the right has a 6-character similar mark, but it reads Da Qing Kang Shi Nian Shi, made under the reign of the Emperor Kangxi in the 18th century. Although the 2 cups are very, very similar, even without the rain marks, a well-trained eye might be able to sort out the 18th from the 15th century originals based on the extraordinarily unctuous glaze on the Chenghua cup and the slightly different painting on the Kangxi cup. The next slide shows a group of Kangxi period porcelain, that is to say, late 17th, early 18th century porcelains, but also including intentionally 2 fake Kangxi style porcelains. The 2 interlopers, the imposters in this photo, are the large black ground vase with prunus decoration with a trumpet neck on the far right. And then just left of center, the black ground and green enameled covered vase. These 2 much later porcelains made in imitation of Kangxi show the difference between an imperially commissioned porcelain, such as the chicken cups, and later porcelains made for the market. The black ground vase on the far right, the tall trumpet neck vase, is a very famous category, which was at the turn of the century, first appeared in the market, had never been seen before. And it was rumored that it was something taken from the sack of the Summer Palace in Beijing. And a number of these black ground vases appeared, and they were the most sought after examples by Western collectors. Morgan and Rockefeller fought over these famille noire vases, and they fetched the highest prices ever for Chinese porcelain at that time, at the late 19th, early 20th century, when European and American collectors were eagerly collecting Chinese porcelain. This kind of conversation, real and fake, eventually sometimes raises the logical question, how do you know? How can you tell? Well, there is not any really reliable scientific test to determine the age of Chinese porcelains, but a great deal of research has been done over the years in China and around the world, and a scholarly consensus on the correct chronology is well documented. Reading art books and museum catalogs will give you a very useful information about the history and chronology of Chinese ceramics. But I think the key to recognizing the genuine ceramics and avoiding the duds is the careful study of the best examples in museums and private collections and anywhere else you can find them. By handling the genuine porcelains and carefully studying them and using all your senses to appreciate the weight, the balance, the texture, the styles, the methods of making and the decoration, and if possible, placing questionable objects of similar appearance beside each other, beside genuine examples of the same type. Put the question one and the genuine documented example gives an opportunity for close comparison and educates the eye. But in short, good old-fashioned connoisseurship is the answer to the question, how you can tell. It's a never-ending study, but it's also endlessly rewarding.
Thank you so much, Jim, and also Ai Weiwei for your perspectives on copying. That was really fascinating. I think I'll just start off since Jim was the last person to speak. But I just have a question about, when you're talking about connoisseurship and how you talk about how it's so important in order to see the difference between an original and a copy, about close study and making comparisons. Do you have an example of a copy that nearly passed off as an original, and what gave it away?
Good question. The instance that sticks in my mind happened maybe 20 or 30 years ago when I was first beginning to study Chinese porcelain carefully. I was working for Sotheby's, and someone brought in a Chinese porcelain dish with Femi Rose enameling on it. The dish had the mark of the Emperor Qinlong on the base. And it was beautifully done, but there's something just a little odd about it. In the painting was not typical of early 18th century, in the sense that it had more grisaille than a thin black line in the painting. And the layout of the design on the dish was awkward. So we looked at it and carefully examined it to see if we could figure out what would make it clear whether this was a genuine Yongzheng piece or not. The more you studied it, the porcelain was perfectly all right. It showed the right treatment of the foot rim. It showed the right calligraphy and the rain mark on the base. But the Femi Rose colorful enamels on the inside just weren't satisfactory. But if we were going to judge it carefully, we better examine it very carefully. And we came up with a system of studying under magnification the glaze at the juncture of the overglaze enameling and the underglaze white original glaze. And when we studied it, we could see very slight, soft scratches in the glaze, natural wear from it being perhaps stacked with other porcelains or from its original years. Because when you see a line, just a scratch in the glaze, if you study the margin between or right at the edge, if the scratch disappears under the overglaze enamels, then you know that the scratch came before the enameling. Whereas the early example would have been taken right from the kiln to the enameler and had the extra decoration added. So by spotting fine line scratches as they originally appear on the white porcelain and then disappear under the overglazed enamels, we were able to definitely show that this is a later enameled piece. Rather like one you have in your show, Hiromi, you have a bowl, which is original 18th century Chinese porcelain with an imperial rain mark, but the enameling were made later. The enamels were made later, and it's still a very difficult category of fakes to discover. And there are examples that are still on museum shelves that are not recognized as later copies because it's such a subtle difference.
Yeah, it is the challenge, I think, of museum curators of looking at what's in storage and trying to figure out, are these copies, are they, as you had shown in an earlier slide, whether they're revivals, because sometimes they're so well done and it's very difficult to be able to tell. But and your explanation of how careful looking and deduction, I think that's really important, because sometimes scientific tests don't always work. Actually looking and seeing about scratch marks and deducing when the scratch marks were made, if things are missing, those are really invaluable, really, into being able to physically tell when something was made and help with dating. Yeah. But in the case of Weiwei's, a piece, his blue and white dragon jar, which I was so fascinated to see. And Weiwei, you had said that this was actually inspired, that you wanted to make a copy of it after a very famous type, a Ming blue and white dragon vase. And this was an intentional copy. Greg, could you put up the slide? where I think it's quite useful just to be able to see the comparison of, yeah. So here on the left is the blue and white dragon vase that Weiwei had talked about, and we just found I think, what was this the vase, Weiwei, that you were inspired by, or you had mentioned maybe it was something that came up in auction?
I would never say I'm inspired by something, it's not, I don't use that word. And well, I can say it's kind of reference and to, yeah, is it related? But obviously you can see the image are even very different, and all the details, languages are different. The shape are different, the glaze color has differences is there. Certainly mine is better than the so-called originals, from my point of view, not from James' point of view.
I was interested to learn, because I hadn't seen your version in the flesh.
You see the dragon on the right side only have 3 fingers. Yeah, I doubled it.
So it's better, it's more auspicious. This is a mythical dragon.
I make different scratches.
And you also put the 2 Chinese characters for fake. I like your play on words. You always have a very sort of humorous and witty take on in your works. And you had said, oh yeah, you can actually see it. Thank you, Greg. If we zoom in, those 2 characters on the base of the neck, the shoulder there, which you said is fa ke, which in Chinese, well, in English, the romanization is fake. And this is a constant theme that I've sort of seen throughout your work. You even named your studio, your design studio back in 2000, Fake, which I thought was very unusual. Would you like to sort of elaborate on this idea of your of using and perpetuating this idea of fake?
Well, as an artist, I always take artistry or what happened in the past as ready-made. So my works always reference or in a conversation with what happened in the past, and that gave me some fun to do. And of course, this is related to many things about us, society or culture, how culture would still be alive or to be influential, or how it's related to value judgments. So those for me, it's a interesting discussion. Obviously, you can say the struggle is you make a perfect vases, but same times you call it a fake. And my design companies are called Fake. That means also in writing it means fake. So, and I guess no company will call themselves as a fake. And yeah, I like to make fun of those things.
So your interest in fake and real goes back to your understanding of what truth is. This is something that I've heard or read somewhere that you had mentioned, and you've pointed out that this concept of truth is very much part of nature and is also relative, and is not absolute. So I was wondering if you could talk about that, because I think that's something that I'm also trying to get at within my exhibition, about how it is about different viewpoints. And I think I see this in your work as well, in different perspectives.
In Chinese culture, the human condition include humans' intelligence or way of to realize ourselves to be 自在, that means self-existence or self to just to understand that you are there. That is very much inner conditions rather than facts. So the truth for Chinese is stronger than facts because they understand that as a human being, facts has nothing to do with you. You're just, but as someone holding the understanding of a truth, and that really depends on individual's interpretation. So if you look at Chinese painting, calligraphy, or generations of making the same thing again and again, or to use different forms to challenge that, you make porcelains in copying of metal work, you use porcelain in copying jade, or you use jade to copying the, well, I would not even call it copying, but to represent bronze. That is the history of Chinese art. Without that kind of challenge or respect, all those respect, and you will not have a continuity of so-called the culture, and which is interesting because in the West culture you have this kind of absolute truth, and in China we don't have that.
This idea of different perspectives, I also was trying to broach as well within the exhibition. And I wonder, Greg, maybe if you could show the very last slide. Yes, here. Which just by taking an idea of one shared theme of depicting the Sino-Japanese War of 1895, but in our collection we actually have prints that were made from the Chinese perspective by Chinese artisans, which you can see on the left, and then also on the right you have Japanese artisans who depict that same war. You can see, aside from artistic differences, they're actually very different. If you study them more carefully, this theme that you're seeing, the scene that you're seeing right here is actually when Japan wins the war against China. They were fighting over influence in the Korean Peninsula. Japan wins over China, and this is the signing of the treaty. And just looking at the two, although it was both the same information presumably given, on the right you can see from the Japanese standpoint of view, they are the victors, and it is a very sort of solemn and very noble type of depiction of them signing the treaty, where they are clearly shown as the victors on the right. Whereas on the left, it's interesting how the perspective, the Chinese craftsman who, or artisan who depicted this, he's conflated many different ideas. It's much more crowded. There are foreign envoys depicted there that actually were not even in part of the scene. And the kneeling person in front of the table, that was actually a completely different incident that was part of the treaty that happened during the signing of the treaty, but on a different day. And that was an attempted assassination on one of the Chinese dignitaries. So it's interesting, again, to show how one idea can be viewed from many different perspectives and different viewpoints as well. So I am mindful of time because Lindsay has popped up. I would love to continue this discussion because there are many other questions that I had that I think our audience also has questions. So perhaps Lindsay, if you'd like to maybe read out the questions.
Yes, thank you, Hiromi, and thank you, Jim and Weiwei and Hiromi for that wonderful discussion. So we do have some questions that have come in through the Q&A box and also a few through the chat. So we'll try to get to as many as we can in the last 10 minutes or so. So the first question we have is, how do you think about the role of Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam in the development of porcelain as art? Or how is it distinct from Chinese porcelain? I'm not sure who wants to take that one.
I have no knowledge about that part.
And so I'm not sure I understand the question. Is how does the production of art in Southeast Asia differ from Chinese?
Yes, I think they're asking about the distinction between porcelain in countries like Vietnam versus Chinese porcelain, if I understand correctly.
Well, they are as different as you would find the difference between 19th century French painting and 19th century German painting. They're both paintings, but if you take a careful look at all the available things you could see, there's no confusion between the two. It's not a problem. I think that Vietnam occasionally made blue and white porcelain, but it just simply doesn't look the least bit like Chinese porcelain, except as a kind of long, distant relative. And it's not too difficult to develop the criteria for judging which is Vietnam and which is Chinese made.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. Yeah, that might be something that we can find some images for and provide later on. And this is a question for Weiwei. Has the Western idea of originality and authenticity invaded Chinese culture so that there are different expectations now than there used to be, or a synthesis of some sort? And how does this play out in your own work?
First, I think in the contemporary practice, you can see the understanding already very different in the West. If you look, I think you have a Jasper Jones show in Philadelphia Museum, and Jasper says something which I still remember. He said, "You never change the subject matter, but you only change the interpretation," something like that. And yeah, that clearly answers what he thinks the art is about. If you know Jasper, at least his early works, all those images come from a clear reference, could be a target or a map, or color charts or something. So he never really so-called create something, but reinterpret something. So which I think is very, very interesting Western artist. But many artists are not like him, and also doesn't understand his practice, which I think is less interesting. They always think they are the original one. They try to be original there, and they're doing something so creative, which for me is complete lost sense about what culture is about. And so, yeah, that you see, but of course, that's my how it relate to my work. I'm fascinated by whatever human society have been created. Can be in Egypt or Romans or Renaissance or Chinese. And of course, you can always make some kind, you can easily see what is disadvantage or what you like or what you don't like about. So that is very hard to describe. It's really about who you are, and what you appreciate is about who you are, really. So the understanding is not rather by the work, but rather by as an artist or as a human, your judgment, your aesthetic understanding.
Wonderful, thank you. Weiwei, I think we have another interesting question for you. The examples that you have shown display careful consideration of what has been done in the past, with the creation seemingly mirroring the amount of time it took to create that item, or to create at that time. On the theme of time, how much does the present moment, boredom, or a joke influence the works? It seems to make static historic precedent personal and experiential in the now.
Yes, if you look at the past, you see Picasso spent half of his time just trying to match what he learned from African sculpture, or you see Van Gogh is trying to learn from Japanese prints, or Brancusi also trying to, or Modigliani is trying to really to learn from the different cultures. But very often you see those traces can show clearly they are deeply influenced, but I really doubt how much they really get from what they liked. But you can see how humble they are. But today we're living in a very different world. Every day we look at the internet. We are so much informed by different kind of technology, language, and presentations, all kind. Even our Zoom today, also with the listeners and whoever questions. So we're living in an extremely different but also difficult period of time. So my work, I just trying to catch up with the situation. Because the reason is very simple. It's not because I want to be funny, but rather, you just have one life. You're trying to really make some argument and get yourself involved, and trying to realize and appreciate the time we're in.
Wonderful, thank you. That's very insightful. So I'm looking at the time. We have about a minute left. I know we have more questions, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Greg for his closing statements. And thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks to our speakers, James Lally, Ai Weiwei, and Weiwei's incredible staff. Thank you, Hiromi, for orchestrating and moderating this program. And thank you to Steve Keever and AV for running things behind the scenes. And to you, Lindsay, for your generous assistance, and to our captioner, Kara. And thanks everyone in the audience for attending this afternoon. Really, just by showing up, you're supporting the museum, and we're so grateful for your presence. We wanted to give an extra thanks to those who might have donated any increment to today's program, which allows us to keep offering amazing talks like this. And if you haven't donated or would like to donate more, you can contribute to our annual fund, which we can provide a link in the chat to do so. And also thanks to our members. Membership is a great way to support us and to receive member perks like member programs, free admission, and discounts. And again, thanks to the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Global for their generous support. Our next talk will be another artist talk. It'll be with Akinbode Akinbiyi on a recent project focusing on the effects of the pandemic on the urban landscape, and that's going to be on March 3rd. So we hope to see you there. When this program ends today, you're going to see a survey pop up when you close the window. And that is also another way you can help us know how we did. So we'd ask that you fill that out by February 28th. And with that, thank you for attending this afternoon. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.